Dungeons are one of the staples of the Legend of Zelda series. Today, I'm going to be ranking all 11 of the dungeons in The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time from the worst to the best. My name is James, and I started this channel simply because I love video games. If that sounds like you, please subscribe to my channel so you can see more videos just like this one. Ocarina of Time was my very first Zelda game to play as a kid, and I replayed it recently on Nintendo Switch, and I'm excited today to talk about what I think about the different dungeons. At the beginning of this video, I said that there were 11 dungeons I was going to be talking about. I chose to include some of the smaller interstitial, like half dungeons that you might not want to count for your ranking, but I decided to go ahead and include them here. That being said, there are definitely going to be spoilers in this video for The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. If you don't want to be spoiled, don't watch this video. And with all of that out of the way, let's get started. Coming in last place is the Gerudo Fortress. This one's not a full dungeon. It doesn't have the temple name like most of the other ones do, but I chose to include it in this video because it's not optional and it does give you the same small keys that are used in the major dungeons as well. The thing that puts this one at the bottom for me is that the whole thing is really based around this stealth mechanic that's just not very fun. There's also no rewards for finishing the Gerudo Fortress, like items or anything like that. The only thing that you get is to be able to now walk around in the Gerudo area without them arresting you, and you get access to a new minigame. The thing really sealing it at the bottom for me is that it's just very confusing to navigate. You're not given a map or a compass that would help you kind of navigate a little bit. You're kind of just left to figure it out. And on the Nintendo 64, all of the walls and textures all kind of blend together, making it not very fun. Number 10, The Bottom of the Well. The reason this one ended up so low for me is that I just don't find the Bottom of the Well particularly enjoyable. It's pretty late in the game at this point, and they make you go back in time and do this little mini dungeon as Child Link, so you don't have all of the abilities that you have as Adult Link. It also just isn't really fit into the game very well, because it doesn't really tell you that you're going to need to go back in time to access the bottom of the well. You're in Kakariko Village as an adult, and Navi will just keep telling you, like, oh, let's go check out the well, let's go check out the well, let's go check out the well. And it can be a little bit frustrating. And that was actually one of the only things that I had to look up when I was on my most recent replay of the game. Coming in at number 9 is the Ice Cavern. This is another one of those interstitial dungeons. This one feels a little bit more official because you are actually given a dungeon map and I believe a compass as well. You're given a new item that you need to progress in the game. And overall, it's just better than the 2 dungeons that I have further down on this list. The thing keeping it from being any higher for me is that mostly it really does just kind of feel like filler. That's partially because if you get to this point in the game having only one bottle, you're going to be spending a lot of time walking back and forth to the blue flame that you need to melt ice in the Ice Cavern in order to progress. Coming in at number 8 is the Shadow Temple. This is by far the worst of the main dungeons. I think what I don't like about this dungeon the most, and the reason that it ends up so low on the list for me, is I just really don't like the Lens of Truth and using it to solve every single room in the dungeon. I don't like the gimmick of you enter a room and you see something right in front of you that you need to get to, but you can't get to it because there's like invisible walls or invisible enemies blocking the way or anything like that. However, I do want to point out that the Shadow Temple has a very, very good boss battle. But unfortunately, I'm not ranking the bosses, I'm just ranking the dungeons. Coming in at number 7 is Dodongo's Cavern. I wasn't really sure what to do with this one. What puts it above the dungeons that I've already talked about is that it does feel like a full dungeon. It doesn't have any weird gimmicks that it forces you to use or any specific mechanic that's used over and over and over again. And it holds your hand a little bit less and lets you kind of figure out some stuff for yourself, which I like. The things keeping it from being higher up on the list are that this dungeon is riddled with fire bats that will burn your Deku shield, which I find really annoying. And I also just find it to be kind of limited by being early in the game, in that you don't have very many items available to you, so it can't really do very much. Coming in at number 6 is Inside Jabu Jabu's Belly. Or just Inside Jabu Jabu. I don't remember exactly what it's called. This one actually has all of the strengths of everything that I said about Dodongo's Cavern, except you are also introduced to a new item, the boomerang, and you're able to use the boomerang to dispatch enemies and solve puzzles and hit switches from far away, and I just find it pretty enjoyable. Unfortunately, it does still have some of the same limitations that the Dodongo's Cavern has, as far as there just not really being a lot of items available to you, and being Child Link, you don't have a lot of options available to you either, which is what puts it right here on the list. Coming up next is the Fire Temple. What puts this one above the ones I've already talked about is that this is a really cool and unique dungeon. It has like a tower shape to it that you need to use to your advantage when you're moving between floors and stuff. And when you do something on one floor, it might affect something on another floor as well, which is really cool. There's also some brand new enemies in here, and since you're not playing as Child Link, you don't have to use the Deku shield anymore. You can use the Hylian shield, which does not catch on fire and burn. And so all of that makes it a little bit better than the ones that were further down on the list for me. What keeps it out of the top 4 for me is that I just find this dungeon to be very confusing. This is the dungeon that I think I got the most frustrated with when I was replaying the game last week, which is funny because there's another dungeon later that I'm going to be talking about that actually has a reputation for being super tough and confusing. Coming in at number 4, the Great Deku Tree. What puts this one this high on the list for me is that it does a really great job of setting the bar for what to expect from dungeons in this 3D space. There's really not a lot of diversity in options and puzzles available to you, but the things that it does have you just kind of figure out on your own, that it doesn't tell you, it lets you just kind of experiment and figure stuff out. I think it does a really great job of setting the tone for what to expect in the rest of the game. So the thing holding it back for me is mainly just that since it is an introductory dungeon, you don't quite get the same satisfaction when finishing this dungeon as you do with some of the other ones. That holds it back a little bit for me. Before I give my top 3, please go ahead and subscribe to my channel. I'm trying to hit 1,000 subscribers by the end of 2025. Coming in at number 3 is the Forest Temple. This one gets a little bit of a bump from just being the first dungeon that you get to conquer as adult Link, so it's kind of exciting. What gets it above the other ones on this list for me is that in many ways, the Forest Temple is going to be your test ground for what you can do as adult Link that you weren't able to do as young Link. Additionally, you find the bow in this dungeon, and the bow is really great both for puzzle solving and for enemies and for, shooting stuff. The main thing keeping it out of the top 2 slots for me is that it's really just not as satisfying as the other 2 dungeons that I have up there, and you still don't really have a ton of items and stuff that you can use. It's really just not much of a challenge. Coming in at number 2 is the famous Water Temple. So, the high points of this dungeon are, I think that the concept of changing the water level in order to affect different things in different rooms, affect enemies, and puzzle solve, and do all this stuff. I think it's a really cool mechanic. I also think it's really cool how when you have the iron boots on and you're underwater, it completely changes up the feel of combat in the way that you can approach enemies. You can't really go around swinging your sword underwater, so you have to find different ways to deal with them, and it makes you kind of get creative, which I think is what Zelda is all about. The main thing keeping it out of the top slot for me is that I do think that on a first playthrough, this dungeon can be a little bit confusing. Or very confusing. And I do think that's actually alleviated on the 3DS version of the game. I think on the 3DS version, it says on the map where you can change the water level and stuff, which I think is a huge win. Also on the 3DS version, you use the touchscreen to change between your iron boots and your regular boots instead of doing it in the pause menu like you do on the Nintendo 64 version. But for the most part, those are things to just kind of nitpick a very, very good dungeon. Coming in at number 1 is the Spirit Temple. So I guess the only thing to talk about really is why it's in the top spot. This is the only dungeon in the game where you play half of the dungeon as Child Link and then the rest of the dungeon as Adult Link, which I think is really cool. While you're playing as Child Link, you go in and you find the silver gauntlets that you can't use as Child Link, but you can use them as Adult Link, which is cool. I also think the inclusion of the Mirror Shield is really interesting. I always forget about the Mirror Shield in this game. It comes so late in the game that it feels like it's kind of winding down, that it's not really going to teach you anything new. And then all of a sudden you get this brand new shield. You're introduced to a whole new type of puzzle. And there's the added bonus that the Mirror Shield, because it's a unique item, cannot be taken by likes. Above everything else, the biggest thing that I like about the Spirit Temple is that it really does make you think outside of the box to solve a lot of different puzzles, and it makes you use everything that you've learned so far in order to progress. And that's why it comes in at number 1. Guys, that's all I have for this video. In the comment section, please let me know how you would rank the different dungeons in Ocarina of Time. Until next time, the best way to keep up with me is on Twitter and on Instagram at James_Solar and on Blue Sky at jamessolar.bsky.social. Thanks, guys.